Wanted to welcome everybody here. Thank you for taking time to come to our workshop. This is a workshop. It's not going to be a lecture. So first and foremost, I want you to feel free to ask questions. And we will do our best throughout the workshop to answer them for you. Don't hold on to them. As I said to my colleagues work in the back controls here, there's a lot of congestion that happens in our head when we have questions and we can't get them answered. So I want to encourage you to do that. This is the Woodstock Effect, how 3 days of peace, love, and music define philanthropy forever. I'm Sandra Lintelman Delaripa. I'm president of Harvest Development Group. And because that wasn't enough, I'm also president and founder of Blossom, e-learning for serious do-gooders.
And hi there, I'm Scott Selig. I'm the vice president of the Harvest Development Group and a born and bred Granite State resident, grew up in Laconia, New Hampshire. So good to see all of my friends from New Hampshire.
Yes, and I recognize some people that are in here, so thank you all for joining. We'll do our best to make what you say about us true. So today we have this workshop that's going to be in 3 parts. The first is understanding how Woodstock defined community and philanthropy. And then number 2, correlating how this illustration of community and philanthropy can translate to your nonprofit. And then 3 is the hands-on piece, where we're going to apply that understanding in breakout rooms to a case study that we developed to help you get an eye for building a community of philanthropy like Woodstock in your organization. Now, we're not going to promise that you're going to go away and be able to do this, but we wanted to give you this 45 minutes of key points and considerations. At the end of this workshop, what we hope you'll be able to do is understand why self and tribe act as magnets to your community and how value and worth, belonging and impact influence community members' decision making. You'll also be able to clearly identify the 5 components necessary in your framework for community, and you'll be able to identify the specific actions, tactics, and tools to facilitate your community. So let's get in the mood.
The Woodstock Music and Art Fair, a 3-day Aquarian exposition at White Lake and Bethel, New York, will give you uncomplicated, unhurried, calm days of peace and music.
More than 200,000 followers of pop music have jammed the Catskills, Mountain Hamlet, and Bethel for a rock music festival. Cars are being abandoned on highways leading to the resort area. Festival producers have called for all vehicles heading to that festival to turn back home.
You people that have placed tents in the viewing area, please do take them down so that those behind can view as well. The situation such as this, we have a journey responsibility to you. We absolutely have this
One thing about us is we're a pretty big city right now, so we've got all sorts of things. Richard Bach, get back to Eddie Kramer in the sound part. Richard Bach, get back to Eddie Kramer.
Before we begin, could we ask you please once again to leave the towers? And then in the same breath, thank you for making all this possible.
So let's start with a poll. There's 4 things I want you to be able to share with us. One is, how many people here have heard of Woodstock? How many people have attended Woodstock? How many people are, like me, consider yourself a Woodstock aficionado? And how many people right here, right now are going, what is Woodstock? So while you're filling that poll out, let me tell you a little bit. Woodstock Music and Art Fair, it was hosted August 15th through the 18th, 1969. It was 500,000 people on 37 acres of fields and hills and woods in this little bucolic town of White Lake, or Bethel, New York. That's upstate, about an hour and a half from New York City. It actually was deemed an ecological disaster by many, and it was actually called a state of emergency by the state of New York. It ended up losing a ton of money. That's a lot of money during the event, and it was in debt for years. So I see that most everybody's heard of Woodstock, and I have two aficionados. We're gonna have to talk later because I love this place. We go every year. There's actually a museum now on the site called the Bethel Woods Museum. It's beautiful. You would love it. And they do concerts, but they also have a lot of artifacts and beautiful grounds to walk on. So anyways, this was a disaster, but it was also one of the largest and most iconic experiences embedded into American, maybe even global history. And it continues today to make millions of money on residuals from movies and music and merchandise. It continues to have a devoted following of tens of thousands of people, and they actually showed up on the 50th anniversary in 2019. It was originally conceived as only 3 days, and it was for music and peace, or music and art and peace, for 50,000 people. Very small section of the 500,000 that ended up being there. In addition to the music, the festival producers planned to have campsites, food booths, arts and crafts villages, social and ecological group displays. They had a children's playground and a petting zoo, and they had medical tents and merchandise booths.
You know, Sandra, I just wanted to ask Stephen if we could delete the poll or minimize the poll because it looks like it's blocking your slides.
Great.
I don't think that's something that I can do on my screen, just to avoid, because I think this is going to keep happening. Can I be a pain, Sandra, and ask you to change the way you're sharing your screen so it's just the PowerPoint as opposed to your whole monitor? Is that going to cause a problem?
I'm not sure I know how to do that.
Okay.
I just put the poll down. Does that make it better?
You're fine now. You're fine.
Okay, great. So, so let's talk a little bit about how did this disaster that started out as a musical festival produced by a head shop owner, a music executive from New York, and 2 trust fund babies turn into an iconic experience that anchored itself into the fabric of America. It's really because of community. These 4 rain-soaked, poorly resourced days over a weekend in August in this sleepy upstate country of New York somehow became a classic representation of community. And so how is this community of Woodstock, this Woodstock community experience, a model for building a culture of philanthropy? Well, it was this Woodstock community that evolved philanthropy, which evoked action. Woodstock was that unicorn of philanthropic culture that we all are chasing down. It's a state of being, philanthropy, and that experience was a state of being that engendered this action inspired by love of each other, love of mankind. And it was a community that was nurtured, albeit very chaotically, but through its nurturing, it grew its philanthropic response. We often hear that term, build a culture of philanthropy. I worked in nonprofit executive leadership for 25 years. And I would say probably somewhere between the mid-1990s on, someone coined that phrase, and that's all we've talked about for the last 25 years. When we look at philanthropy, it literally translates, as we know, to love of mankind. It's that state of being. The result of philanthropy, though, is the action that we see, the symptoms, the consequences that come from that. Things like giving and assisting and sharing and supporting and guidance, on and on. Woodstock illustrated how that culture can be established in a really sustainable way in just 4 short days. But how do we go about building this community? I can tell you that the producers of Woodstock did not go into it saying we're going to build a community, right? Community cannot be forced. It's not something that we create and we put on our website and call a society and invite people to be a part of it. There's a magnetism to community. People are drawn to it. And they're drawn to it on two very, very specific premises. The first one is self, and the second is tribe. Self is that realization of what you personally find valuable and worthy. What do you hold as value? What is worthy of your time and resources? And tribe is that sense of belonging to this bigger effort, this bigger global unit, being part of that larger whole, having impact collectively together, and then bonding with other like-minded people. We could stop at this slide and sociologically go really deep about how that has expressed itself and what we need to do with it. And in fact, we're taking this presentation, which has been here for about a year, and going deeper into coursework and books with it, because it is so important to stepping back away from the tactics of fundraising and really focusing on this community, right? In terms of Woodstock, the individuals that were attracted to the community, the ones that made this incomprehensible assembly of 500,000 people work, they valued music and art and peace. So they found the weekend promise, what they were told, to be worthy of their time because it fit with what they value. This was their self-realization. And this is why they came by droves to be a part of this. But the other thing that drove them there is this sense of belonging in being together with others that were like themselves. That weekend offered them the opportunity to fulfill this tribal need for belonging. So in the chat, what I'd love for you to do is just throw out some communities that you know you belong to, right? And there are a lot of them because communities are the basis for our culture. So as I'm walking through this, just go ahead and start listing some of the communities that you know you're a part of. Communities exist because they must, to exist, communities must answer those two things. Does the community fulfill something I value and find worthy, that self-realization? And do I trust the community to respect and honor and include and embrace me? Do I feel like I belong? Here are some communities that you might recognize. You might find that you belong to one of them. But as the list evolves, I think the realization is we belong to a lot of communities. And so that question of worth comes into play there. Because worth is really the deciding factor for your community on whether they're going to spend time with you or not. Is your community worthy? Is it more worthy than their Elks Club or their neighborhood gathering or their sorority? Worth is such an important part of community, and the only one that can define that and represent that is you. So we know we can't force community, and we know that community derives its members in this magnetic way by showing the value and worth to its members or potential members, and also showing its tribal realization, the ability for someone to belong and feel like they belong. And feeling like that you belong to something is a critical point in decision making as well. I can tell you that I belong to maybe 4 or 5 communities, and one of them really doesn't make me feel like I belong, and we'll explore what that might look like in the next few slides. But I don't spend much time there, and I get these really sad emails, we miss you, why haven't you come? And probably should sit down and tell them. But so we know we cannot force community, but we can facilitate community. We can build and operate a framework to nurture community. In order to do that, we need to understand what the 5 core components of community are. So if you're representing the self and the tribal realization to members and they're drawn to you, what do you do when they're there, right? And it's these 5 core components that will help you to facilitate a thriving community like Woodstock. So we're going to understand what each 5 are, and then we're going to apply them to Woodstock, apply them to a representation that we did with the client, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms and have you use a case to identify components of these 5 or details of these 5 components in the case for support.
And so I just want to share that in the chat, there's a link to the slides. So if you'd like to download the materials for this workshop and take notes as we're going through it, you can just click on that link. Thank you.
Great. So let's start with the first component, people. We already talked about how communities are magnetic and self and tribe realization need to be present or need to be promised, right? But the first component of facilitating a community is making sure that you're focusing on people, not companies, not foundations, not government agencies. These are not community members. Even if you have a society of corporations or sponsors that you're nurturing, you're not really nurturing Coca-Cola. You're nurturing a person in Coca-Cola, which is why oftentimes when that person leaves the company, you lose their engagement. So focus all on people. People are the core of any community, but not just any people. Back to self-realization and tribe, your people. People that find what you're doing or promising fits with what they care about, with what they value. Spending their time is worthy. Spending their money is worthy. And they're not going to do something else because they want to be in your community. The remaining 4 components, and we're going to go deeper into these, each one with its own slide, are shared purpose. And that's about what I value personally, but also what values the community has, or what value the community does that is meaningful to me. Shared experience, and these are group engagements that inform the community of value and worth. On tribe, on self-realization, they bond and establish this community. Shared resources. It's more than sharing from members to community leaders. So obviously the most illustrative symptom of or consequence of shared resources in a evolved community is members sharing their gifts with you, donations. And that's where we're going, right? But what's more important in creating a thriving community is also giving them opportunities to share between themselves. It's about members having these unplanned, unfacilitated, spontaneous sharing that really illustrates how they feel about being in community with each other. And then finally, trust. And that's trust that's built through this consistent and intentional communication. So when we look at Woodstock and we look at people, obviously it wasn't entities. There was very little corporate sponsorship at Woodstock. There were corporate executives, people that were representing corporations there. But it was very specifically people that identified with the value and the self-realization of the promise. My grandmother wasn't at Woodstock. My aunt could have been there, but she was getting married. So she made that priority decision based on worth, right? The right people were attracted. And I'm hammering this because when we do marketing and communication, we need to make sure we're very, very specific about what the value and worth and the self-realization and the tribal belonging and impact is, not to us, but to our community members. And Woodstock marketing and communication was very specific about what that community would offer that weekend. They were so clear and focused that the right people showed up. Too often we think that the universe is our pool of people to pick from, and everyone should and could be our people. But that just creates confusion and obstacles that really doesn't allow for the right people to hear you. So understanding who your right people are, what do they find valuable and worthy, is essential in facilitating your community. And then we have shared purpose. Well, the shared purpose at Woodstock was primarily around music, all kinds of music, folk, pop. They had some psychedelic rock in there. some blues. But believe it or not, the majority of attendees were not the hippie freaks of the day. So the shared purpose doesn't need to box people in by how they look or how much money they have or where they live or who they know, right? The shared purpose is really driven by that value and worth statement. So the attendees of Woodstocks were kids from New Jersey with hair that ended above their ears, chinos, press button downs, but they all shared this love of music, as well as valuing nature and freedom and peaceful coexistence. Thinking about the promise of the shared purpose shouldn't include the stereotype boxes of what people look like, where they live, and who they are. You'll also notice when we talked about people, we did not identify them in terms of their value to us. We didn't say we're building a major donor community, and we're not building an annual fund community or a planned giving community. We're building a community based on value and worth and self-realization. Then we have shared experience at Woodstock. Well, it would be really easy for me and kind of lazy to state that the entire weekend was the shared experience, and of course it was. But in a little pop-up city of 500,000 people, there were these little sub-experiences that were being shared. So if we look back at the map of the festival geographic community, the actual site of the music and stage was really, really small. It was that red circle there. Everything else were these sub-experiences that were being shared by 500,000 people. And they included activities like theater and poetry reading and crafts. Those were planned. But as we talked about the evolution of a community and how bonding happens, there were many unplanned shared experiences too. Pond swimming and bathing, meditations and yoga. This is because the people at Woodstock felt that culture of philanthropy, that love of each other so quickly in that community that they were empowered to initiate on this act of giving, of developing and leading and taking part in experiences with each other in the spirit of peace, love, and music. And similarly, the philanthropy that quickly evolved within the Woodstock community also expressed itself in sharing of resources between the members to the community leaders, such as the producers and the working staff, even they called them please officers, not police officers. But the shared resources also happened between each other. And they happened both based on need. I need food. Because that ran out really quickly. I need shelter. I need rain coverings. And on enjoyment and entertainment. I have great food here I want to share with you. I have alcohol, I have drugs, and yes, even love. No one can imagine how 500,000 people didn't turn ugly when that food ran out or that toilet paper ran out, when the torrential rains came and the drinking water dried up. And so community cannot thrive without this last component, and that's trust. Being trusting, which means a person who trusts others, and being trustworthy, meaning someone whom others can trust. Those are two essential trust factors in community. Building this trust usually takes a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of time in your community. But what we know greases those skids and builds it more quickly, which they had to do at Woodstock, is communication. Consistent, meaning that the information is given regularly and that people can rely on it coming. And intentional, meaning that the information has a purpose and that it is meaningful to the participants. So at Woodstock, there were 3 gentlemen that were charged with building this trust among the 500,000. Chip Monk, and that's really his name. Actually, Chip is a nickname, but Chip Monk. John Morris, who was one of the event production team, and Wavy Gravy, whose real name was Hugh Romney Jr. And a little side note, he actually was from West Hartford, Connecticut, where Scott lives, and Connecticut, where I live. They were the voices that you hear consistently over the microphone, those stage announcers, and their pattern was intentional. They were there to keep the people informed and entertained, engaged, heard, listening, alert, aware, and most of all, responsive. And that is what intentionality builds. It builds this community that's eager to hear from you, so that when, with all the noise in social media and in email and on television and videos, with all that noise, the intentionality of your message builds a community that says, oh, they're speaking, let me listen. It makes the community feel seen and important, involved, and purposeful. This intentional and communication is what builds that trust in you, in your information, and in
Those
your
of you
policy.
who are ardently collecting firewood and have chosen to take the fence down because there's no other dry wood around, would you wait until at least after the performance?
Ellen Heyman to the front, Jim McLean, please go to the pink and white tent hospital as soon as possible. And kissing builds up your mouth.
Peter Hutchinson and Wayne Decker to meet Elaine and Myra in front of the information desk with insect bite medicine.
Please, there's been reports that due to the wet mud underneath the towers that they've been slowly moving downhill. The guy wires are getting a little tighter. So if you'd please leave the towers now and stay off the towers.
So how does this translate to your nonprofit? Well, self, value, worth, tribe, belonging, impact. If you take nothing else away from this workshop and just focus on that, you're going to have the start of a really strong community. But let's look at those 5 components in a nonprofit structure. So first we have people. Again, not donors, people that find you valuable and worthy. What are you doing right now to understand who those people are? Do you know who your people are? Do you know why they find you valuable and worthy? And one point here is you will not have just one community. You will have many communities, but I would suggest that you just start focusing on one. Determine what the value and worth of that community is, and make sure that you are articulating that in your messages so that the right people find you. Then we have shared purpose. So like Woodstock, there's your big picture, your mission, but you also have these smaller shared purposes such as impact, social norms, maybe religion, or an affinity group like your university or your hospital could be a shared purpose for community. You have shared experience. Shared experience certainly are things that you plan. And let me tell you, this is why your galas and your golf events won't go away, because sometimes that's the only shared experience that your community has. Here's what our organizations too often look like, right? So we have our organization, we're working with our clients as a staff team, we're working on, we have these planning sessions, maybe we invite a few volunteers or key committee members in. We have these internal celebrations when we have this great win, whether it be large funding or a success that we have in impact. We have these smaller groups that meet to talk, to research and to talk about problems and solutions. And then we have what we consider our community out here, and we're asking them to support us. Your community must have that experience to feel in community for you to thrive. Let's talk about shared resources. Certainly that expression of philanthropy, money given to you, is one of the most evolved representations of a shared resource. But a truly evolved community will see its members sharing between each other. So your job here is not to make that happen, but it's to facilitate and to create the opportunities for that to happen. Facilitate the nurturing those shared resources. Do you communicate with members how they can share resources between each other? Do you have that pathway? There is a really simple representation of that with third-party fundraising, right? Certainly you may have a third-party fundraising program and policy, but do you collect your third-party fundraising people and give them a community to share their experiences with each other? All done in the philanthropy or the philanthropic culture of your organization. And then we have trust. And honestly, this is the hardest for most nonprofits to establish and to manage. It does require full-time attention, whether that's a staff member or a volunteer. Your communication must be meaningful. It must feel to the members that it's intentional, that it's delivered, that it's not delivered for the sake of completing a task, but that it has some purpose for them so that they will pay attention when it comes through. Let's just imagine if Woodstock had a scripted program, right? If someone stood up on stage with a script and started reading from papers, no, the stage communication there was vulnerable. It was real and meaningful. It was filled with information that people needed and could use and wanted to use. And it stirred this feeling within the community that inspired their philanthropy. We recently worked with a client, and they were an early childhood collaborative. And what you see here, this framework, is the first pass. And you'll do 3 passes of this. The first one is a brain dump. The second one is validation or proof that what you've dumped is real and meaningful, and eliminating what isn't. And then the third one is aligning that with resources, making sure that you have the capacity and the capabilities of doing what you want to do to facilitate this community. But in the childhood collaborative, we worked with them over the last 6 months. So timing is everything, and we worked through the pandemic. We were able to identify their shared purpose, as you see here. From there, we talked about the people that would find that magnetic, that would have value and worth in what the shared purpose was. We walked through the shared experiences, both those that were planned and ones that might be unplanned. We created an opportunity for the group, for this community, to share resources. We did weekly video calls where members of this community could talk together and share what they understood and what they were doing. We hosted a private Facebook group, and then we asked members to share materials between each other. And that wasn't a free-for-all. They sent it to the collaborative. We created a wrapper. We placed the community members' material in there, gave them credit, and then pushed it back out to the community. And that was a really valuable resource. And we saw people creating these bonds through that. And then finally, we built trust. This was a community that existed already, but we increased their trust level by having these daily briefs that had important information, weekly newsletters. We did video emails, and we created a YouTube channel just for this community. So I breezed through this because I want you guys now to jump into breakout groups. I'm going to give you just a little suggestions first. We're going to be in there for about 6 minutes. This is a case. We've made it simple. We know some of you have more complex systems, and we're not promising that you're going to leave this workshop with the ability to do it perfectly. But we want you to practice this. And so using this case and the question and answer document, I think that's in the chat, Scott, or should be in the chat. In your breakout groups, have someone read through this, and then I want you to identify and answer the questions in there so that you can begin to build, and you're going to have this case in your group, so don't panic about not having memorized it. I want you in your group, after reading the case, answering the questions, to build out really unique representation for people, for the shared purpose of this case. And in your build out, try to think up things that aren't obvious. Right? Go a little bit deeper if you can in the 6 minutes we have for you. So why don't we go into breakout groups now, and then
I just wanted to share that Stephen did share a link that will take you to the tools that we'll use for the breakout rooms.
Those 2 very long, indecipherable links, just make sure you click and have access to those files before we go into the breakout rooms. So I'm just going to wait about a minute, give everybody a chance. And if you don't need it, you can call me in and I can share it again. All right. So I'm going to send everybody off into breakout rooms. Everybody have fun. Be good to each other.
If everybody is in, what I would love to do is, and we're not going to have time to hear from every breakout room. I'm sorry, we've gone over. And I've tried to stick to my notes. I literally could talk about this for hours, which would bore you to death. But I think the benefit of this is really important. As I said to Jessica while you were in breakout rooms, you know, we focus so much on the tactics, on building the right annual fund letter and getting the right schedule, and how do we do online donations, and what does our major gift program look like? If we could just step back and focus on building this community or communities, I think we would see our culture evolve to a point where people were literally throwing money at you. So this is really important, and I appreciate you giving us a little more time. So let's hear from maybe 3 or 4 people. If you want to raise your hand and speak, that's great. We'll unmute you. If you want to just type into the chat box, however you'd like to do it. I'd love to hear some of the unique aha moments or observations and items that you came up with.
I think Melissa.
Okay.
Hi, Melissa.
Can you hear me? Okay, we were muting there. Hi, everybody. I was in we called ourselves three. The first thing that I think we sort of fell upon and immediately was that the shared purpose of this case study seemed to be the fact that they wanted to honor the historic impact of the theater itself within the community and the arts that were offered by the theater, while also simultaneously fostering the growth of the arts, both in the school system, in the community, for future directors through the Black Box Theater, et cetera. So I like the dichotomy, if you will, of honoring the past and the historic nature of the theater while also fostering growth for the future. Do you want me to do a couple other ones, or do you want to stick with that for right now, Sandra?
Yeah. Tell us how that drove the rest of your expression.
I think it was pretty macro, I'll call it. I'm a social worker, so I think we were trying to be as inclusive as possible about what who the stakeholders were, what the membership looked like. And it was interesting because we were trying to figure out how we wanted to, or how you were interpret membership, whether that was the actual membership program of the theater or whether that is the membership collectively of the community around it. We kind of stuck a little bit more to the actual membership of the theater. But, people who live there or vacation there, these are groups of people, just the people who love the arts and the theater, but also that growing community of future directors, producers, and so forth, teachers, students, parents. I think that looking at young people, but also honoring the fact that there were a lot of people in the community or they're part of their membership that had this historic knowledge of maybe issues that had come up with the theater in the past or past events that they'd want to revive. So I thought it was a nice case study, and I work for the Alzheimer's Association, so I never think of community theater. So it was nice.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. That's perfect. So the macro view that, Woodstock was about music, absolutely, and all that macro experience and resources. And then you also began to identify some sub-communities, that historic community, which is one actually we're doing a capital campaign for this actual organization. And historical is a piece of that campaign. And you'd be surprised the magnet that's been for people that have never been involved with that theater. How about another one? I think we have time for one more. Anyone? Bueller?
Lori, looks like Lori. How long?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm gonna be horrible at this, but I'm just volunteering.
Oh my gosh, what a terrible way to start. Start again.
I already warned my
Start again. No.
I'm like, this is gonna be awful, but I'm just gonna go for it.
No.
So I'm just gonna blow through it. So our shared purpose, bring arts to the community to inspire, connect, express human experience through programs, supporting artists, through experiences and events that we offer. What type of people? Community members of all demographics, artists, performers of all kinds, people who value and love the arts. Shared experiences, I kind of honed in on like how to expand that or whatever. So I was saying off-site performances offered, say in nursing homes or schools, shows to the public, volunteer opportunities, shared resources, time, special FB groups, workshops, classes, intentional messaging, definitely the history of the theater and all the people that it's impacted all those years, bringing people together to inspire and entertain them. Theater creates community. And the consistency question on staying active, especially for this sector, even if they're off season or closed or on hold right now. Share info that is relevant from other arts orgs. Share live streams, stay activated with social media, blogs, emails.
Absolutely.
All right, that's all I got.
You were not terrible at that. Just validating you. You were not terrible at that.
Okay,
Again,
thank you.
this wasn't fair. We gave you 6 minutes and a pretty easy but maybe comprehensive case to do. I'm going to pull out what you just said at the end, and that is staying present consistently in social media. Worked with this organization for 1.5 years on their campaign, and the first thing we said to them is you need to have more consistent communication, not just a newsletter and not just your Facebook page. So resistant. And then the pandemic hit, and they have taken Instagram by fire. So they have these producer talkbacks, and they have type-ins, and they've done so much with regard to social media and being present. They have something going on every day, every single day. So good work. Okay, we're gonna wrap up. Thank you. So community, it is the basis for everything we know. It's that center of our family and our friendships and our neighborhood. It's really what connects us, and it anchors our purpose and belonging. It's not performative. It's not something that is created that we are invited to be a part of. It's magnetic, right? It humanizes us, and it creates this philanthropy. So create that experience of community in your organization. It will evolve philanthropy. Get back to the garden. Stop thinking about the plants and the planting. Think about building that culture that will attract hundreds of thousands of people, as we're about to hear in the last clip, like this woman and her friend Flora, who flew, bused, drove, and walked just to be a part of this community. And if you do that, you're going to have a community that is filled with members that will talk about it, will respond to it, and will actually live it 50 years later.
Flora and I flew standby, $16 to New York City, and then we took a bus to train to Monticello, and then eventually some buses, and we got a ride in a car. But eventually, when we saw that it was bumper to bumper, we just got out of the car and started walking. When I came upon the child of God, he was walking along the road, and I asked him, tell me, where are you going? He told me, said, I'm going down to Lester's Farm, gonna join in a rock and roll band. Got to get back to the land, set my soul free. We are stardust, we are golden, we are built carbon, and we got to get ourselves back to the garden.
So thank you. Thanks for joining. I realize our 50 minutes, 60 minutes is not enough time to masterfully address this topic. And that's why we want to invite you to go to our website and hit contact now, contact us. Scott and I will get back to you, and we'll talk 15, 30 minutes about your particular idea or interest or issue. Certainly want to be able to brainstorm with you in that way. Thanks again.